Rendezvous with Mark O'Neill at the book fair always turns out to be my most remorseful moment, as I only meet him once a year. I always know that in the past year he's been very diligent in writing another in-depth book on someone or something, whereas I have been squandering my months and weeks and days waffling on a nightly radio program out of nothing or out of relative. So this year, Mark's surprise, like a magician picking up a rabbit or a dove from his black magic box, is the presentation of a silent wife of a very important Chinese political character. It just happened by coincidence that next door, there's a book talk on Bruce Lee, whose wife is an American, Anglo-Saxon American lady who has also kept very quiet for decades, despite all the colorful gossips and legends around her husband for decades. So there could be some strange cultural similarities when a European woman is married to an outstanding or a prominent Chinese husband. Right? So in this case, it's quite intriguing to read about the silent Russian wife of Chiang, the late president of Republic of China, based in Taiwan, who passed away in 1988. And his wife outlived him by 10 or a few years, more than 10 years, and she had been also keeping mysteriously and discreetly quiet about herself, her family, and the journey of contemporary history she had undergone. Now, I think personally, there's not a very responsible attitude for mankind as a unique character like Zhang Fangliang, right? Should have so much to share, not only with her contemporary people, but for many scholars and Chinese and other people in the generations to come. So, but for whatever reason, she's passed away, taking many secrets to her grave. But she left quite a bit of a legacy, part of which has been her very colorful family, her sons and daughters, and particularly the elder son, who was known to be a spoiled playboy, and the younger son, Zhang Xiaowu, had been number one notorious head of the Taizhi Dang of the Kuomintang style, and associated with a few horrible murder cases, including the death of journalist Chiang. There's so much to tell. It's quite a galaxy of gossips, histories, knowledge about the Communist Party and the Nationalist Party. It's been quite a pity that few scholars in the West have become interested in such a an interesting part of the encyclopedia of modern China. I think we've come to a moment when not a single piece about China, whether modern or ancient, should be missed in order to understand the China story now on the rise in the West and for the interest for the rest of the world. So I don't know where to start, right? Because it's such a complicated story to tell, and such a three-dimensional treasure land of anecdotes and exciting stories, right? So perhaps to begin with the cliche, what made you interested in this silly woman, Mark?
Well, I was lucky. I lived in Taiwan 81 to 83, and that time was martial law, and Chiang was the president. So every day on television, newspapers, there was photographs and speeches by Chiang. But we never saw his wife. So I asked my Taiwan friends, does he have a wife? Oh, he has a wife. What kind of wife? 不是那么清楚啊. And some said, oh, he has a foreign wife. Oh, really? And one person said, oh, yes, she's from the family of the Tsar Nicholas II. She's a Russian wife from the Tsar's family. Oh, really? But she never appeared in the newspapers, on television, or anything. So from this time, I have an interest. Who is this lady? You know, she is such an important person. She's the wife of the president, but we know nothing about her. So then Chiang Ching-kuo died. There are many books about him, but there is almost no book about her. So that is what gave me the idea to do it. And as you know, Taiwan is a very open society, so it's quite easy to get information about people. Well, let me start with our PowerPoint then. Is it okay?
Yes.
So she was born in Orsha, which is in Belarus. Now, Belarus is now an independent country, but at that time it was part of the Tsarist Empire, 1915. Now, Orsha is maybe one of the worst places in the world to be born in because it's on the war route between Russia and Europe. So in 1812, Napoleon's army invaded Russia. The French army stopped in Orsha. Then they invaded Moscow. You remember they captured Moscow, but then they retreated. They came also back to Orsha and they were leaving, so they set it alight. They burnt it down. So when the German army invaded Russia in 1914, they also go to Orsha and occupy Orsha. And in the Russian Civil War, which is between the Tsarist army and the Red Army, that was also fought around Orsha. So she was born in a bad place. So she lost her parents at an early age, and it was just her and her sister, Anna. And as you can see, from very early on, they escaped from Orsha and they went to Yekaterinburg, and we will speak about that later. So they were orphaned. There were just two sisters just living by themselves. And they moved from Orsha to Yekaterinburg, and then she started to work in this factory in Yekaterinburg, and that is where she met her husband. Okay? Excuse me. So this is the photograph of her. She is on the right, and on the left is her sister Anna. So Anna was almost her mother because she didn't have any parents. Their life was extremely difficult. No support, no money, no relatives. So they worked all the time. And she got this very good job in this machinery factory in Ekaterinburg. So for her, this was a good place to be. Sorry. Now, I propose this photograph for the cover of the book because I think it captures very well the romance between them. But, joint publishing is quite conservative, and perhaps it's a bit disrespectful to a president and his wife. Anyway, this was a photograph of them in the river near where the factory where they worked. They met in this electrical machinery factory. So they used to go off for the weekend, and this is a wonderful photograph of them swimming in the river. So now you ask, how is it that Jiang Xingguo happens to be in the same factory in the middle of Russia? And this story is even more amazing, because he was born in 1910 in Xikou in Zhejiang. His father was Chiang Kai-shek. He was educated in the local school, then Shanghai, then in Beijing. And in 1915, his father sent him to the Sun Yat-sen University in Moscow, which is quite an extraordinary decision. He's only 15, right? His father sends him to this place so far away from China, and he has no control over what happens to him there. He can't look after him at all. He's only 15. So I think his father had two ambitions in his head. One was he wants to cultivate Stalin as a supporter of the new Republic of China. And secondly, the Sun Yat-sen University was set up to train communists. So most of the students are members of Chinese Communist Party. Maybe 20% are members of the Kuomintang. So he was hoping his son will go there and mix with both sides and keep an eye on the communist members and also the Kuomintang members and learn about this new generation. So that was the idea of his father, to send him there. So at this time, who is in charge of Soviet Union? It is Joseph Stalin. So as soon as Jiang Xingguo arrives, Joseph Stalin is very happy, because Jiang Xingguo is like his hostage. He becomes a hostage of Stalin. And he controls whether or not Jiang Xingguo can return to China. And as we'll see in the story, it was more useful for Stalin to keep him in the Soviet Union than send him back, because he has more value to him if he's under his control. Now, Jiang Xingguo was a great success in Russia. He learned Russian very quickly. He can drink not as much as the Russians, but nearly as much. He danced very well. He's an outstanding student at the Sun Yat-sen University, and he became a supporter of Leon Trotsky. Now, this was a good idea at the time, but as Chip is indicating, it turned out not to be a good idea, because Trotsky was expelled from the Soviet Union by Stalin and eventually was killed by a Stalinist agent. So this was a mark against Jiang Xingguo by his enemies there. He is then sent to a military academy in Leningrad. He writes a very excellent essay. He is the top student in this military academy. And when he finished his studies, he asks Stalin if he can go back to China, but Stalin refused. So then, Jiang Xingguo has the whole communist experience in the Soviet Union. That is to say, he worked in a factory, industrial factory. Then he worked on a rural commune. Then he was sent to a labor camp in Altai, which is very near China. It used to be part of China, in this very remote place, a gulag, with all the enemies of the state. He worked there for about 6 months. So he have all these terrible experiences that you have. But he works so well in this gulag that they then send him to Ekaterinburg, and it is there that he goes to this factory where he meets his wife. So here is a map. So can you see Ekaterinburg, right in the middle of Russia? And it's a very famous city because the Bolshevik armies, after they captured the Tsar and his family, they took them to this city. And the White Russian army, that's the anti-communist army, was approaching Ekaterinburg. So they have to decide what to do with the Tsar and his family. So what do? They execute them. And now, in the post-communist period, this has become an act of martyrdom. And they have built a huge Russian Orthodox church on the site where the execution was carried out. And the members of the Tsar's family have become martyrs of the Russian Orthodox Church. Now, after the communists took power in Russia, they turned Ekaterinburg into a very important industrial city, and they set up many big industrial plants. And the one that Chiang Ching-kuo and Feiner were working in was one of these very important plants. So it was a good place to be working because you would have guaranteed food supplies, you would have an apartment, you would have your salary paid every month, you would have a canteen. You would have things which were not available to many citizens in the Soviet Union at that time. So the marriage blossoms. You can read more details of the romance in the book. And they get married, and at the end of December 1935, the first son, Alan, is born. Okay? So this is a very nice photo. This is taken actually in China, so we're running a bit ahead, but I just wanted to show you a photograph of the two together with Alan. Now, in 1935, we have the Great Terror. And I'm sure you know what happened in the Great Terror. Thousands of people were executed, tens of thousands were charged and condemned for crimes they didn't commit. And Chiang Ching-kuo was a victim of this because someone accused him of being a Russian spy. Well, he wasn't a Russian spy at all. He had no contact with Japanese spy. He had no contact with Japan at all. But that was enough to get him dismissed. So he spent 6 months just in their very small apartment with Alan reading books. And he was waiting for the KGB to come to the house and arrest him at any time, because you could be arrested for no reason. So this was a very black period. And there are many Soviet jokes about this, and I put 3 into my first draft, and I sent it to a Russian scholar, and he became quite angry with me. And he says, why are you Westerners always laughing at us? You know, you should have only 1 joke and not 3. So I cut out 2 of them, but I'm afraid I have to tell you the one, okay? So we're in this Siberian gulag, and it's minus 40 degrees, and there are 3 people in this hut. And they just arrived in the gulag, and they're freezing cold, and they're completely shell-shocked, you know. But they want to start talking. So one says to the other, well, why have you been sent to this gulag? And one of them says, well, I was against Beria. Beria was the head of KGB at that time. So then the second one turns to the third one and says, well, why are you in the gulag? And he said, well, I was for Beria. I was in favor of Beria. So then the third one turns to the first one and says, well, why are you in the gulag? I am Beria. So this story gives a very good indication of the atmosphere in Soviet Union at that time. But in 1936, in December, we have the Xi'an incident. I'm sure you know what happened in the Xi'an incident. And Chiang Ching-kuo is so smart. He's sitting in his little apartment. He reads about the Xi'an incident in the newspaper, and he writes a letter to Stalin. He says, Japan is going to invade the Russian Far East. The only hope it won't invade is if the Kuomintang and the communists work together. Send me back to China and I will help you bring this about. So Stalin says yes, because for Stalin the nightmare is the Japanese attack on the east and the Nazi attack on the west. So he wants to do everything to stop the Japanese from attacking. And if Chiang Kai-shek makes an agreement with Japan, avoids a war with Japan, then an invasion of Russia is very, very likely. So he allows Chiang Ching-kuo to go back to China. So Chiang Ching-kuo is very happy about this, but I don't think Feiner is quite so happy, because she was expecting to spend her life with him in Soviet Union. I mean, this is her country. Suddenly she finds, no, she's going to this new country. So they take the train to Vladivostok, and then they take the boat to Shanghai. So the couple arrive with Alan, the young son, and they get off in Shanghai, and they're taken to meet the first family. That's Chiang Kai-shek and his wife, Su Meiling. And Feiner is very, very nervous because she cannot speak Chinese, she cannot speak English, her wardrobe is very poor, and she meets Su Meiling, who is the most elegant Chinese woman in the world, beautifully dressed with wonderful hairdo and earrings, and very poised lady. And fortunately, Su Meiling is very grateful to her. So the first meeting goes off quite well. And she has a grandson to present to Chiang Kai-shek. So he's delighted to have a grandson. But Chiang Kai-shek is very suspicious of Jiang Jingguo. Is he now a member of Soviet Communist Party? Has he been sent here as an agent to spy on me? This is what Chiang Kai-shek is thinking. So he won't allow his son to join the government or have any sort of official position. He sends him to live with his first wife, Mao Fu-mei, who's in the picture, and they lived there for 9 months in Xikou, in Zhejiang. And the purpose of this is for Jiang Jingguo is to re-educate himself in China again. So he spends the time learning Chinese characters, just like a Gui Lao. He has to write his memoirs, which he writes in Russian. So his father knows what he's been doing there. And his wife, Feiner, she's learning to be a Chinese wife. So actually, this is a very good period for her because she's not under pressure of having an official life. She gets on well with her mother-in-law. In the beginning, it's just sign language, but gradually she learns the Ningbo Hua. And in this small town, she goes riding on horses, and she goes swimming in the river. And it's the talk of the town, because of course they've never seen a white, blonde-haired Guaimui ever. And to see the wife of Jiang Jingguo, you know, riding a horse and swimming in the river is absolutely unthinkable. So she provided a great source of gossip for all the 9 months she was there. So here's Chiang Kai-shek. Now remember, Su Meiling is not her mother-in-law officially. Mao Fu-mei is her mother-in-law, but in reality, Su Meiling is her mother-in-law. So this was the first 9 months in this small town, Xikou, in Zhejiang province. So then Chiang Kai-shek is convinced his son is not a Soviet spy or a member of the Communist Party, so he allows him to start work, and he sends him to this town called Gannan in the south of Jiangxi. And Gannan is a very remote place, and the Japanese have occupied most of Jiangxi, but they haven't occupied this place because it's too remote and it has no resources. So they spend 5 years there. So this is a very good period for Feiner, because she spent a great deal of her time with her husband as part of his work. They go to meet the local citizens. She raises money for the war effort. She helps to run nurseries for the children. And of course, she's a film star there because they have never seen a person like this. So everyone wants to talk to her and learn about her life in the Soviet Union. And her Ningbo Hua makes great progress during this period. Now, can anyone tell me who this lady is? Yes. Now, Jiang Jingguo was very sociable, very talkative, very popular character. So this lady became his secretary, personal secretary, and they had relations. And she has 2 twin sons. Can you tell me the name of the sons? So Jiang Jingguo is very delighted to have 2 more sons, and they were born in Guilin. They were not born in Gannan. They were a long way away. So Feiner didn't know about her and didn't see the children. But after a few months, she dies in very mysterious circumstances in a hospital after a stomach ache. And there are many theories about why she died. Was she killed by the intelligence services of Chiang Kai-shek or Jiang Qingguo or somebody else? I don't know. We don't have a very definite answer to this. But her two sons are then given to the family, her family, and it's they who bring the sons up. And when Chiang Kai-shek goes to Taiwan in 1949, they also go there. So they grow up in Taiwan. So in 1943 is the Ichigo operation of the Japanese army, and then they overrun Gannan. So Jiang Qingguo and his wife and his family, they have to escape, and they go to Chongqing. So I'm sure you know what this picture is. Chongqing was subject to air raids by the Japanese Air Force, and the Chinese Air Force was very weak. So the only way the Chongqing people can save themselves is to stay in these tunnels. So there was an enormous network of tunnels built in Chongqing for the people to go during the air raids. And Jiang Qingguo and his wife, they didn't stay in these tunnels. They had houses, in the mountains, which were relatively safe. So they were not harmed in the bombing raids. So here we are in August 1945. The war is over. And this is the Chongqing people celebrating the end of the war. Now, the next 5 years are very difficult for Feiner because her husband has now become a very important assistant of his father. So he's always working with his father. He's traveling all over China. And Feiner and her children see very little of him. So she lives in Hangzhou. Her children go to school in Hangzhou. And her husband comes to visit her, but not very often. And she doesn't know where he is because we're now in the Chinese Civil War. And of course, the capture or the assassination of Jiang Qingguo would be a great coup for the Communist Army. So his whereabouts are a secret. His schedule is a secret. So his wife is very much kept in the dark. It's a very difficult period for her. So finally, in April 1949, Jiang Qingguo decides that it's too dangerous for her and the children to stay in the mainland. So they take a plane from Xikou and they fly to Taiwan. That's Feiner and the children, but not him. He stays in the mainland, as you know. He stays until December. So this is even more anguished period for her because she's living in Taipei. Her husband is somewhere in the mainland. She doesn't know where he is. It's very difficult for them to communicate. And the danger for him increases every week because the area controlled by Kuomintang is getting smaller and smaller. The communists have penetrated the Kuomintang military, the government. They have many spies. So nobody knows how long he will survive. And as you know, his father insisted on staying till right at the last minute. And finally, they fly from Chengdu to Taiwan. And finally, the couple are reunited. So yeah, this was a very difficult period for her and the children in Taiwan. So the next 10 years, the 1950s, are actually quite maybe the happiest period because he doesn't have such a high position now in the government, so they can have a more or less normal family life. There's 4 children in the family, and they live in the center of Taipei, Zhongshan Beilu, very close to Zhongshan Beilu. So, they can just walk out from their house, walk down the street, and they're in Zhongshan Beilu. So they can go to the cinema, they can go to restaurants, they can go to coffee shops. And it's a happy family period. So here's a portrait of the couple with 3 sons and 1 daughter. Okay? So she liked mountain climbing, climbing. Taipei is surrounded by hills and mountains, so they often went together for the weekend. Can you tell me who is on the far right of this picture? This is Chiang Weibo. This is the adopted son of Chiang Kai-shek. He brought him up as his own son, but he's not his natural son. So Chiang Weibo studied in a military academy in Munich. Then he joined the Wehrmacht. He participated in the invasion of Czechoslovakia. And he was in a panzer tank on August the 30th, waiting for the order to invade Poland. And the Ministry of Defense in Nanjing decided it would be better not to have the son of the president invading Poland, So they sent him to America for more training. Very clever decision, So when I lived in Taiwan, he was living there also, and that's his wife, and there's Feiner, and then there's Jiang Jingguo. So this was quite a nice period, and they often went to this Russian cafe in Wuchangjie in Taipei. And when you go next to Taipei, you can go there too. It's now called the Mingxing Cafe. It's very close to the train station. And it was set up by Russian emigres. So they would have Russian food, Russian drink, and it was a place for all the white Russians to go. So Jiang Jingguo and his wife often went there. So here's a nice picture of her. Her drinking capacity was better than that of her husband, and she also liked smoking. But she had to hide the cigarettes in the house to prevent the children from finding them. But unfortunately, they were smarter than she was, so they found them and they would smoke also. So this is her eldest son, Alan, Jiang Xiaowen. And as Chip mentioned, he was not a good student. He was a spoiled brat. And we have in the audience today someone whose father knew him. So when I finished, we'll invite him to tell you more about Alan. So this is a famous quote of running Taiwan was quite easy, but running his own family was too difficult. He could not control his two eldest sons. I mean, he's the most powerful man in Taiwan after his father. He had all the apparatus of the state, but he couldn't control them. I mean, he even beat them, he locked them up, but they still did what they wanted. So this is a nice husband and wife picture. Now a lot of stories in this photograph. A lot of stories. First grandchild. Now this is the embassy of Taiwan in Tokyo. And I want to tell you this story because this is Jiang Xiaowu, who was the second son. And I met him when I was in Tokyo. And let me just tell you the story. Taiwan used to have diplomatic relations with Japan. And the officials there were very well informed. They knew the Japanese foreign ministry people very well. And the Taiwan foreign minister went to Chiang Kai-shek and said, next month, Tokyo is going to recognize Beijing. It's going to take away the recognition with us. So what we must do now is sell our embassy in Taipei to a private person, maybe for $1. So the embassy doesn't belong anymore to the Taiwan government. So Tokyo will move its recognition to Beijing, but the embassy and the ground does not belong anymore to the Taiwan government. So the Japanese government cannot take it away and give it to the Beijing government. But Chiang Kai-shek was so stubborn and so much believed him himself, he said, they can't possibly do this. How can Japan recognize Beijing? This will not happen. So a month later it happens. Japan gives the site and the building to Beijing. Beijing demolishes it and builds a new embassy there. But when the same thing happened in Washington, this time the Taiwan government was smarter. So they gave the site and the building and the residence to a private person. So when Washington recognized Beijing, they had to give a new site to the Beijing government to build their embassy in Washington. So when you go to Washington, you can visit the one that was given to the private citizen. So when I was in Japan, Mr. Jiang Xiaowu was the ambassador there, so I went to interview him. But actually it was very disappointing because he was not diplomat. I mean, he was not a very well-educated person. We have interview for about an hour and a half. I went back to my office. My editor says, okay, Mark, we want a long story from you, a long story full of, good quotes and good content. I said, I'm afraid there's nothing much to say. My editor got quite angry with me, Why are we paying you this money? I mean, you interview ambassador, we want a good story out of you. So all I can remember of the interview was there were pictures of Jiang Xingguo and Jiang Jieshi all over the room. So our photographer had a very good session because whatever angle you took the photograph, there would be at least 2 images of him and his father and his grandfather. So we didn't get a good story out of it, but we got a lot of good images. So January 1988 is the death of Jiang Xingguo. And the death is extremely dramatic. So I don't have long enough now to explain it all, but please read it in the book. And I just want to say one thing. He and his wife had separate bedrooms at this time. So when he dies, his doctor is there and many members of the cabinet are there. So he passes away at 3:30 in the afternoon. And then the doctor says, who is going to go tell his wife? She's in the room over the corridor. But nobody wanted to tell her. They were so afraid that if they told her, it might have a very serious effect. So you will have to read the book to find out who, in the end, went to tell her. So he passed away in January 1988, but she still stays living in the same place there. She doesn't want to move out. She becomes completely dedicated to the room and the building and the effects of her husband. She doesn't change anything. She keeps the bed, the table, the chairs. Every day she goes into the room as if he was still there. She talks to him as if he was still there. She even went to the tomb in Taoliu, and she would sit on this marble slab and she would speak to him for several hours. And the driver waits in the car outside and waits till she comes out. So at this time, her daughter Amy and her son Eddie are living in San Francisco. So they think it would be a good idea if she moved and then they can look after her. So with a lot of difficulty, they persuade her to take the plane and go to San Francisco, and she stays with them for a month. And as you know, San Francisco has a very good climate. It's not so densely populated, very nice food. The doctors said it's much better for asthma to be there. But after a month, she said, no, this is all very nice, but I have to go home. Meaning she must go back to the house where she lived with her husband. So they're quite shocked, but that was her decision. So, as you can see, in a period of 10 years, she lost 3 of her children. All 3 of her sons she lost to cancer. I think this is very rare in history for one mother to lose 3 children within such a short time to cancer. And when I asked the Taiwan people to explain this, many of them said it's 天字的报应，天字的报应。江街市杀了那么多人，天子又杀他的后代。Now, I'm not sure if you agree with that or not. I don't know. But anyway, she had to endure this loss of her sons. And in my book, I try to explain how she endured this. And we got a very good interview with one of her daughters-in-law who explained this in great detail. And it was a really memorable interview when she explained how her mother-in-law can deal with this tragedy. So this is the funeral of Feiner herself. So the one on the right is Fang Zhiyi. This is the one I interviewed. This is the daughter-in-law, the daughter of the third son. And the others are the fourth, the next generation. Now, I don't want to talk for too long, so now I want to invite Eric to come. And Eric's father knew two of the children in California. So Eric, please come and say something.
Actually, my father knew them because Alan Zhang actually went to school in California. My father has been in California for quite a while. They met because he went to, as in his book, he went to Armstrong University, very close to UC Berkeley, but not quite in the same caliber. So they met, and my father is Panamanian Chinese, and he is Russian Chinese. So mixed people has a kind of rapport. And my father was, not very rich and everything, but he always gleamed that Alan has the best cars, the best girls, the best food. So he was tag along on these trips. And one day he asked him, well, Alan, your father must really love you. Oh my goodness, you have such a lifestyle here. And, how much he gave you, blah, blah, blah. And Alan smiled, and he says, my father loves me, true. But if I have to live on his allowance, that would be a very different type of living than what I'm having right now. Then, but I want to tell you, but you have to tell nobody. I said, my brother says, yeah, of course I won't tell anybody. He says, actually, my grandmother, Shou Mi Ling, actually has a credit line set up for me in one of the banks in Chinatown because they're very close to San Francisco. So it was run by one of her brothers. So he has a credit line, so the father gives him so much, and the grandmother gives him this much. So he able to buy a car, able to have all the parties and everything, and live this interesting life, and not much time for studying. And then one day he came to my father and says, Evans, I have a problem. Said, what's the problem? I have to have a term paper ready by maybe 2 weeks, and I don't think I can do it. And my father says, well, actually, I can do it for you for a price. And he says, how much? My father says, $100, if you can, well, $100 is nothing, blah, 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 blah. So he gave my father $100, and my father was very close to a TA, so he knows how to, get 3 or 4 papers, whip it together to create a cohesive term paper. So he gave the paper to Alan, and nothing happened. He passed the course and with flying colors. So that's it. And in the course of the situation, his sister, Amy, arrived at Mills College at the same time. So he also introduced Amy to my father. And, another mix encounter. And he encouraged my father to take her out on a date or something, blah, blah, blah. So he did. So my father doesn't have a very nice car. A little jalopy, not very nice car. So he took her, but no complaints. But when he was driving the car on the date, he found out that there are some agents in the cars following him. So he got totally freaked out because, oh my goodness. So he understands that he is sort of like the president's daughter. But what he didn't know that basically they're under, like observance. So he get a little bit freaked out. But he told me that Amy was so natural. He was not like, what like people today think about, like Paris Hilton or Ivanka Trump or something. That kind of like, rich girl kind of attitude. She was very down to earth, very sweet. And one thing he told me that, he took him back to his apartment, and the first thing she saw was the clothes on the floor and everything, and she just do nothing, just bend down and pick up the clothes and took up the iron his shirts. My father's jaw dropped. He says like, wow, like this is some kind of first daughter, really totally different from what he expected. And he later told me that it must be the mother who taught her really well to become, very level-headed. And he also told my father that, are you interested to go to Taiwan for some reason? And my father says, no. I'm staying in the United States, and I'm just starting my career, blah, blah, blah. And later on, they drifted apart. But the good thing is that, he met them and everything, had an understanding with them. And later on, my father became a stockbroker, and one of his first clients was TV Sung, which of course is Madame Chiang Kai-shek's brother. So there is a kind of connection going with the two families. So that's the only part that I know. No. No. My father would never wanted to be the son-in-law of that person because he, yeah, maybe, yeah. Thank you very much.
Okay, let's have some questions, please. Don't be shy.
Hello. I have a question about many people describe Deng Xiaoping and Jiang Jingguo having similar backgrounds. They studied in Russia and both like a very practical, very down to earth, like politician. But I really want to know what's your opinions on why Jiang Jingguo chose democracy like later, but Deng Xiaoping did not. Yeah, thank you.
Well, as you know, Deng Xiaoping studied in France. He was on this work-study program, and on his way back to China, he went through Moscow. And you're right, he met Jiang Jingguo, and they're both quite small people, And they walk along the Moscow River, and they had very intense discussion as to the future of China, which we are still doing today. And yes, Deng Xiaoping went back and joined communist side, and Jiang Jingguo was on the nationalist side. And I think that was the best chance of the reunification. When Deng was the head of PRC and Jiang Jingguo was president of Taiwan, one phone call could have made the decision because Jiang Jingguo had the power, As soon as Jiang Jingguo died and a new president was chosen, the chance was lost. So Deng made several offers to Jiang Jingguo, not directly, but indirectly. Let's have a meeting somewhere, let's have negotiations. But by now, we're now in the 1970s, of course, the world had completely changed. Taiwan had a very strong opposition party, and Jiang Jingguo had decided that he would have to democratize. So he thought the conditions were not suitable for a reunification. In other words, the two sides had moved too far away. So, as you read in the book, in the last year of his life, Jiang Jingguo made several very key decisions. One is to abolish the martial law, allow the opposition parties, allow opposition media, and allow elections. And this meant that the future of Taiwan is only now decided by the electors of Taiwan. And once that happens, then of course everything is changed. So until Jiang Jingguo dies, it's possible for one person to decide what's going to happen. But of course now it's the opposite. Yeah.
Hi, thanks. Very fascinating, sort of history of this amazing Russian lady. You were saying there were 3 Russian jokes that you wanted to put in, but you only ended up with 1. What were the other 2 jokes?
Oh, no problem. Of course, no problem. The Time magazine have a star reporter. And the editor summoned him in New York, and he said, I have an assignment for you. We're now 1936. He said, you must go to Moscow, and I want a story on the popularity of Joseph Stalin. And the reporter said, editor, that's a ridiculous assignment. How am I supposed to write that? I don't care. You are a top reporter. You go there, you do it. So he takes the plane to Moscow. He arrives in Moscow. He goes to Red Square. Red Square is full of people. He walks up to them and says, do you like Stalin? And of course, they run away. He can't get a quote out of anybody. So how is he going to write his story? So finally, sorry, I think James knows this story, sorry. Finally, one guy comes up to him. So he takes him right to the middle of Red Square. You know, Red Square is very big. Not as big as Tiananmen, of course, but it's big. So in the middle of the square, nobody can hear what the 2 are saying. So he leans over to the Times reporter and he says, I quite like him. I quite like him. Okay, now let me think. What was the other joke? Yeah. The secretary of President Putin walks into his office and he says, Mr. President, I have 2 pieces of news for you. One is a good news and one is bad news. Which do you want first? So Putin says, okay, let's have the bad news first. The Chinese have landed on the moon. So Putin is very disappointed. Well, what's the good news? All of them. All of them. Maybe some more question about Faina, and not just about her husband. You know, we are celebrating her life today. Any ladies want to offer a question?
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for the presentation. I have to admit that I've never really given a thought to this lady before. And actually, throughout your presentation, I very much got the impression that she's the wife of, she's Chiang's wife. I wonder what's your, what's your impression of her as a, as a woman, as her own, if you could.
Yeah, I think we should say she is a victim, I think, because she's obviously a very capable lady. As we saw in Gannan, in Jiangxi, she was very active. She joined him in his political administrative life. She has many talents. But when they go to Taiwan, he doesn't want her to have any kind of role at all. And I don't know if you remember, but in the 1950s, there were many slogans in Taiwan, and I'm now rather afraid to say them now in case I'm arrested. But one of them involved, anti-Soviet Union. So I think Jiang Jingguo was quite afraid that if people knew he had not only a foreign wife, but a Soviet wife, and Soviet Union was part of the Cold War, the leader of the communist world, and so on, that people would attack him. His enemies in Kuomintang would attack him. So he ordered her to stay away from public life, not to be involved in any political activities, just be content with a family life, domestic life, and keep out of the media and so on. So, and she agreed with this, because of course she has no cards to play. You know, she's a foreigner in this country. She speaks Chinese quite reasonably now, but she doesn't have good connections. She doesn't have money. She has no alternatives. So she has to do what she's told. I mean, she's quite a traditional lady. But if you look at it through the, Me Too movement today, yeah, she was a victim. I mean, she was not allowed to use her talents except, at home as a mother. And once her sister, Anna, you remember her sister right at the beginning? Anna sent a letter, and I have no idea how it arrived in the office of Jiang Jingguo, because it's Cold War now. So you can't send a letter from Soviet Union to Taiwan, you can't send a letter from Taiwan to Soviet Union, or from Taiwan to China either. But somehow or other, this letter arrives in Jiang Jingguo's office, and he opens the letter from Anna. He reads the letter, and what does he do? He puts the letter in the shredder. Now, why do you think he did that? Because he wants to cut off his wife from her former life. He doesn't want her to have any nostalgia or thoughts about her life. He wants to cut it off. So, I mean, that was a very unfair thing to do. So she never spoke in Russian to anyone except to him. She couldn't buy Russian books. She couldn't read Russian newspapers. I mean, that part of her life was just shut away. And that's how he wanted it to be. Yeah. Yeah.
Thanks very much, Mark. Sorry, I arrived a bit late.
We may need a joke from you too. I'm warning you.
I'm just intrigued. Are other family members of hers still around in Russia? And did you manage to meet any of them if they're still around?
Well, that's a very good question. After 1991, of course, the Soviet Union collapsed, and Belarus became an independent country, and it became possible for Taiwan to have relations with cities in Russia and in Belarus. So some Russian correspondents wrote about her. Some Taiwan correspondents went to Ekaterinburg, where she lived, and interviewed people that she had worked with. And the reports were extremely moving, because they all remembered the couple, with their young son, and they remembered the day that they left for the last time. It was February. It was freezing cold on this platform, and they have a sort of party on the platform with vodka and cakes, and they are embracing each other and weeping. And nobody imagined they would never see each other anymore. So this is what they say to the Taiwan reporters, and then they speak a lot about finer. So it was done in this way. So her children said to her, if you want, we can take you back to Ekaterinburg or back to your hometown. But she didn't wish to go, because she was too old, and she'd lost the contact with them. And then once there was a visit from a delegation from Minsk came to Taipei. The mayor of Minsk and another important person in Belarus government, they came to visit her. So this was a very rare event. So she was able to speak in Russian, which she hadn't done for a long time, and she was very, very animated, and they exchanged gifts with each other, and they gave her presents from Belarus, and she gave them presents from Taiwan, and it was very animated. But that was just a little glimpse of her former life, but it didn't continue. Yeah.
Hi, I know you said that
it's easy to find information in Taiwan and it's quite open, but like you're also dealing with information that are quite confidential and maybe hard to trace. So what are the biggest obstacles when you're researching for the book?
Yeah, this is an excellent question. When I chose the topic, I was saying to myself, well, as you know, yeah, Taiwan is a much more open society, so I thought it would be quite easy to get interviews. But the biggest obstacle was my very poor guanxi. You know, guanxi is essential to do anything, you know? And I thought I have some guanxi in Taiwan. Well, I have a little, but it's far too little. Because the people I want to interview, they are people close to Jiang Jingguo and to Feiner. So I wrote to Ma Ying-jeou, the former president. I wrote to Song Chu-yu, the former presidential candidate. I wrote to Jiang Jingguo's personal doctor, who was present when Jiang Jingguo passed away, and told the other people in the room, someone's got to talk to Feiner over the corridor. I mean, these three are all still alive. And they all sent me a very polite reply, no interview. And I think the polite answer is, yeah, it's too sensitive, it's too confidential, but I think that's not the truth. If you have proper guanxi, if I knew Mr. Wang and Mr. Wang played golf with one of those three, or went to dinners with one of those three, he could make the phone call and I would get the interview. So I just, beat myself on the back and hit my face on the floor and regretted, how poor my guanxi had been. Then I wrote to the son of the mistress, Jiang Xiaoyan, who, as you know, is very famous in Taiwan. He was Secretary General of Kuomintang. He was Foreign Minister, a very, very eloquent person. So I wrote to him, I said, can we speak about your mother? I mean, my email, I didn't say speak about Jiang Jingguo, I just said speak about your mother. But no, he wouldn't allow any. So, yeah, I was quite disappointed, but I should be more disappointed with myself, actually. Yeah.
Thank you very much for your sharing this afternoon. I have a question about Feiner's identity as a Russian lady in Taiwan during the Cold War. You mentioned that Jiang Jingguo kept his wife away from the public because of the sensitivity, political sensitivity during the Cold War. But if Jiang Jingguo's wife was a pure Chinese, would she be more politically active like Song Meiling? What do you think?
Well, this is a very good question. I mean, in Taiwan, some people told me, when Feiner arrived in China in the beginning, Chiang Kai-shek said, we don't want this Guai Mue, to be the daughter-in-law of the emperor. But this was just chat among the public. No historian said that. And remember, she presented to him, his first grandson. So he was very happy to have the grandson. But I think you're right. If he'd married the kind of woman we'd expect him to marry, which would be a highly placed Chinese lady from a prominent family or a rich family, yeah, I would have imagined she would play more of a role, maybe not as much as Song Meiling, but, be much more active. But of course, Feiner didn't have the skills to do that. I mean, when I was in Taiwan, there were many jokes about the accent of Jiang Jingguo, because he had a very strong Ningbo accent. And remember, all his education was in Soviet Union. He didn't go to university in China. And forgive me if you've heard this story before, but it's so good. I have to tell you this one. He was attending the Guomin Dahui, the National Assembly, and he was going to announce his vice presidential choice, but he hadn't announced it yet. And he's just about to go on the podium and give the speech. So he goes into the Tsao, and his secretary goes with him and bangs on the door of the Tsao, and he says to him, 咱总统, 谁是副总统? And I don't know if anyone can give us a Ningbo accent, but, you know, 你等会儿, 你等会儿. And what he meant to say was, 你等一会儿. But the secretary hears, 李登辉. So that's how Li Donghui became the president. So once I was in a room with 4 Taiwan people, and we were watching a speech by Jiang Xingguo, and there were no subtitles, right? So he speaks for about 20 minutes, and then it ends, and I can't understand one word. And I turn to my Taiwan friends and say, what's it about? And one says, the Taipei bus tickets are going up by 20 fen from tomorrow. And then I ask his mother, what's going on? The invasion date of mainland is next month. Then I turn to the third one. We are opening a new economic processing zone in Kaohsiung. And then, of course, everyone in the room just burst out laughing because no one had a clue what he was saying. They were all having a guess. So this was a kind of gag. But, you know, Jiang Jingguo was smarter than his father. He realized this. So after this, he put in the zimu. So after that, we always have the subtitles, so they're able to tell. And I'm also ashamed to tell you, when I myself went and you listened to speeches by Mr. Ni Donghe, you know, Ni Donghe Zongtong, his Mandarin is also very poor. So I'm listening to him and I can understand maybe 30%, but not much. But luckily, all the staff of the Weibo in Taiwan, they know this. So they have already prepared, you know, the full text. So even before you ask what is it the president is saying today, they give you immediately the script. So I think the Taiwan people are very versatile, you know. Yeah. Please.
It just seemed to me that it's very, very weird for Chiang to send his son to Russia to study in the first place. Why would he choose Russia while there are other countries like, you know, you could, well, he could have sent him to UK, USA, or like all these like Germany, well, not Germany, but, well, why Russia?
Yeah, this is a very good question. I think the answer is 1923, Chiang Kai-shek went to Russia, his only visit. And remember, we're just 7 years after the Russian Revolution, and Chiang Kai-shek is very impressed with what he sees, you know? You know, the Red Army managed to capture the whole of Russia. I mean, Russia is the world's biggest country. And they managed to conquer all of it. Now, Chiang Kai-shek could not do that in China. You know, he only controlled the central part of China, you know, not the west part and not the Dongbei. And he was very impressed with the organization of the political commissars, the political organization. He thought there was much that China could learn from Soviet Union. And also he was very angry with the Western powers. Because we overthrow our emperor, we now have Republic of China, but all the Western powers, they still want to have their foreign concessions, the bank loans. They want all the privileges they had before. They want their citizens to keep all these extraterritorial rights they had before. He was very disappointed that they didn't help this new republic. We are trying to be like you. We're trying to be a republic, democratic system, and so on. But you're doing nothing to help us. Whereas the Soviet Union was more helpful. And later, in the 30s, the Soviet Union was very helpful to China in the war with Japan. She provided much more munitions, aircraft, and pilots than the West did until much later. So I think Chiang Kai-shek had a very favorable opinion of Soviet Union at that time. But still, I agree. I mean, he's only 15. He's going to this very distant place, and he's under the control of Stalin. I mean, you're handing your son to the control of Stalin. So, incredible decision. Yeah.
That's why I was wondering why, because wasn't it alarming to him that the rise of communism in Russia and what Stalin's done, right? His background, everything, and wasn't it alarming to him?
Well, we were not so clear about Stalin then. I mean, 1925, it was just the early years, and it was a new system. Maybe it would be better than the ones before. Only later do we learn the truth. But still, yeah, it seemed to be putting his political ambitions above those of his son. But as we see, his son rose to the occasion and did very well. But the other son, as I mentioned, he went to Munich because Germany had the world's best army. So he thought his son should learn the ways of the best army. And when I was in Taipei, in my hostel, we had one man from Switzerland, from the German-speaking part of Switzerland, and he used to go to the German club in Taipei, and he said after 3 beers, only 3 beers, Jiang Weiguo will do for you the Nazi marching. Just 3 beers is enough. So you buy him 3 beers, and then he will give the goose step march that we see on the newsreels. He will also sing the songs of the Wehrmacht for you. Maybe that's 2 or 3 more beers after that. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yes. Hello? Is it working? Yeah. I was thinking about maybe it's kind of an explanation, because I think that Chiang Kai-shek went to Japan to study. So he is very much into the military situation. As you say, the Russia has been very, the military strength has been very convincing to him. So I think that there might be that reason that he wants, Germany is very militarized as well. So it's very different from the Sung family that went to US and other places. So I think that might be, and also he is a very traditional father who wants to toughen his son up rather than to, really try to make him into his own person. I think that's a very kind of tough love on his part. But I don't think it works with his children, unfortunately.
父无3代, So I think, yeah, you can't have greatness in 3 generations. It's impossible. Yeah. James, a joke is going to be demanded of you soon, so can you come up with one, please? You've got all the jokes. No. James is my 老师 from Beijing, so, yeah.
Prince Philip sent his son Charles, right, to a tough Spartan military education. So it was the thoughts very much shared by that generation, right? But we very much gain our perception with hindsight. In 1925, right? In 1925, not many intellectuals in Britain or in Europe thought that the Soviet Union would grow into a bit of a monster, in the later days. The Great Purge had not taken place, right? And it was still very much a kind of utopia image, very widely shared by Western intellectuals. And Dr. Sun Yat-sen, shortly before he died, did lay down the policy of collaborating with Lenin's Soviet Union and tolerating the Chinese Communist Party. So it was a trend at that time. Right? It was a trend. So it was the Soviet Union was still in this budding stage that Chiang Kai-shek remained perhaps a little bit open-minded and objective, and then sent his son there without. I don't think he sent his son to Moscow to become a hostage for Stalin. And it turned out to be hostage in the later years before he realized, and then it would be too late. Right?
Sorry, now I remember the third Soviet joke for you. Okay? We're in a train in Siberia, and this train is stopped now for 6 hours. And in this carriage, we have 4 leaders of the Soviet Union. So after 6 hours, they say, look, this 6 hours is intolerable. We are the leaders of the Soviet Union. We must do something about this. Comrade Stalin, what is your suggestion? So Stalin says, bring me all the drivers and the staff of the train and execute them. Okay? Comrade Lenin, what is your suggestion? Everyone get off the train and push it. If everyone push it, then the train should start moving again. Comrade Khrushchev, what is your proposal? I have a lot of proposals, but after I died, you criticized me. You denounced me, so I'm not going to give you any of my proposals. So finally, it is left to Leonid Brezhnev. Comrade Brezhnev, what's your proposal? Well, we all lean back in the chair and we move from side to side, and the train will appear to be moving. Sorry, we have only 3 minutes, so last one from Soviet Union, okay? Michael Gorbachev dies. And because he's leader of the Communist Party, he goes directly to hell. I mean, all the leaders of Communist Party of Soviet Union are in hell. But because he was the general secretary, Satan himself came to the door to meet him. Hey, Comrade Gorbachev, you will have a very good stay here. You will meet many of your former comrades here. You won't be lonely at all. And because you are better than they were, you can choose your own punishment, okay? So he take him to the first room, and in this room is completely black and it's very, very hot. And there are 2 men piling coal into this furnace. And Gorbachev look inside the window, and inside is Lenin in the middle of the furnace. And Satan says it's always 1,000 degrees inside, and they pile the coal, so the temperature never drops. So Gorbachev says, well, no, I think I don't want this punishment. Let's look at other punishments. So they come to the next room, and on this room there is a big bed with nails, and Stalin is lying on the nails, and there's an elephant on top of him, stepping up and down. And Satan said, we have 2 elephants working here, and each work for 12 hours. So when this one is tired after 12 hours, he gets down, and then the other one is on top. So always there's the elephant pressing the nails into Stalin. So Gorbachev says, no, I think not for me. Can we look at another punishment, please? So we go to the third room, and this is a room with glass windows and the sunlight coming through. In the middle, a big circular waterbed, and there is Marilyn Monroe being chased around the bed by Leonid Brezhnev. So Gorbachev says, yeah, this is the punishment for me. And Satan says, sorry, This is punishment of Marilyn Monroe. So you can see what a high standard of comedy there was in Soviet Union. Maybe other industries not so developed, but this one is world class, you know.
Okay, so thank you very much. Thank you for coming. It's been a very fruitful session to let us know a bit more about this extraordinary but tragic lady who contributes with her own sad piece of life into this big jigsaw of modern Chinese history. So thank you very much for your hard work, and look forward to seeing you next year on another piece of work. Thank you very much. Thank you.